would like to invite Ruth Oldham here on the stage. She will present the redescribing mining territories, literature, fragments, and elements by reading of literary texts. Please.
Can everybody hear me? Okay. Is it okay? Yeah, okay. So just before I start, I'd like to, I'm very pleased to be here. Thank you very much to Beatrice and Margarita for all the organization. No, it's not working. No? Or use that one.
Well, probably you should talk.
Okay. 1, 2, 3. Yeah. Okay. That's okay. So yeah, thank you to Beatrice and Margarita for the organization of this very, very interesting day. I'm going to dive into a reading. You insist on being called terrestrial, but who gave you the right to do so? Your real name should be extraterrestrials, people on the outside. Terrestrials are those who live inside. As for me, I've always lived here, in one of these inner earths. A stone sky rotated above our heads, one more limpid than yours, but crisscrossed like yours by clouds at points where those gatherings of chrome or magnesium collected. At times, the darkness is split by a fiery zigzag, not a lightning bolt, but incandescent metal slithering down a vein in the earth. We believed that the sphere that supported us was the earth, and that the sky was the sphere that surrounded that first sphere. In fact, exactly the same as you do. But in our world, such distinctions were always provisional, arbitrary, since the consistency of the elements changed continuously. And at a certain point, we would notice that our sky was hard and compact, a boulder crushing us, whereas our earth was sticky glue, churned up by whirlpools, pullulating with bursting bubbles. This extract, taken from Italo Calvino's 1968 fantastical short story, The Stone Sky, provides a dizzying, vertiginous evocation of what it might be like to inhabit the interior of the earth. The processes of mineral extraction developed over the past few centuries have temporarily provided portals into this mysterious interior, a material and spatial realm that is usually impossible, or at the very least difficult, for humans to access and explore. A sort of world apart, or a different universe, to borrow the words of George Orwell. As we move into the post-mining era, these points into the terrestrial world are closing, and we become once again extraterrestrials. But this underground world and its effects upon the surface above has been and continues to be documented in detail by numerous and varied authors. The contemporary French author Maëlys de Kerangal described her desire to explore this strange realm that is as unfamiliar to us as it is entwined to our existence. I searched for a mine as one searches for a passage leading to the earth's underground. I searched for it as one searches for the door to this unknown space that our existence is based upon, a space that I do not know if it is solid or void, if it is hollowed with alveoli, caves, or galleries, pierced with tunnels or bunkers, if it is inhabited, if it is alive. I wanted to go down into the mine, pass my head under the skin of the planet, as one passes one's head under the surface of the sea, in order to enter into another reality that is as determinate and invisible as the interior of the human body. What follows are a series of literary fragments providing a glimpse into a wider written investigation that we have carried out as we have shared our personal libraries with each other, digging into literature to extract clues and information about the physical nature and imaginative potential of mining environments. I'm just okay. Shall I try again?
One, two, one, two. Let's use this one.
Okay. One, two. Yep. Drawing upon a field of study within the social sciences that recognizes the capacity of literature to problematize a complex reality, making reference to the work of Carlos Ginzburg, Gaston Bachelard, and the architect urbanist Paolo Vigano, we have begun to assemble a spatio-temporally diverse literary corpus, functioning as a lens through which to observe and understand mining territories, moving from the 19th century to the 21st century, from Europe to South Africa, through coal, iron, and gold mines. The corpus includes, so far, works by Émile Zola, D.H. Lawrence, George Orwell, Nadine Gordimer, Alexis Zimmer, and Maëlys de Kerangal. Employing a broad range of literary genres, novel, short story, autobiography, investigative reporting, all the works are connected by their documentary aspect. Their respective authors express a desire to share, as accurately as possible, a lived experience. The detailed descriptions of the mining environment form a common theme that justifies the inclusion of each text in the corpus. Observations at the underface. They all hammered. One only heard these irregular blows, which seemed veiled and remote. The sounds had a sonorous hoarseness, without any echo in the dead air. And it seemed that the darkness was an unknown blackness, thickened by the floating coal dust, made heavy by the gas which weighed on the eyes. One could distinguish nothing. Sometimes blocks of coal shone suddenly as they became detached, illuminated by a crystalline reflection. Then everything fell back into darkness. Pickaxes struck great hollow blows. One only heard panting chests, the grunting of discomfort and weariness beneath the weight of the air and the rain of the springs. What especially astonished him were the sudden changes of temperature. At the bottom of the shaft, it was very chilly, and in the wagon gallery, through which all the air of the mine passed, an icy breeze was blowing, with the violence of a tempest between the narrow walls. Afterwards, as they penetrated more deeply along other passages, which only received a meager share of air, the wind fell and the heat increased, a suffocating heat as heavy as lead. The rock above him, a few centimeters from his face, streamed with water, which fell in large, continuous, rapid drops with a sort of obstinate rhythm, always at the same spot. Separated by planks hooked on to retain the fallen coal, they each occupied about 4 meters of the seam, and this seam was so thin, scarcely more than 50 centimeters thick at this point, that they seemed to be flattened between the roof and the wall, dragging themselves along by their knees and elbows, unable to turn without crushing their shoulders. These descriptions of the physical intensity and discomfort at the depth of the mine come from Émile Zola's seminal 1885 novel, Germinal. Half a century later, George Orwell literally immersed himself in the coal mining communities of northern England, whose arduous living and working conditions he laid bare with meticulous detail in his essay, The Road to Wigan Pier, published in 1937. You start off stooping slightly down the dim-lit gallery, 8 or 10 feet wide and about 5 high, with the walls built up with slabs of shale, like the stone walls in Derbyshire. Every yard or two, there are wooden props holding up the beams and girders. Some of the girders have buckled into fantastic curves under which you have to duck. Usually it is bad going underfoot, thick dust or jagged chunks of shale. And in some mines where there is water, it is as mucky as a farmyard. Everything is grey with shale dust. There is a dusty, fiery smell, which seems to be the same in all mines. An experienced miner claims to know by a sort of instinct when the roof is unsafe. The way he puts it is that he can feel the weight upon him. He can, for instance, hear the faint creaking of the props. The reason why wooden props are still generally preferred to iron girders is that a wooden prop that is about to collapse gives warning by creaking, whereas a girder flies out unexpectedly. Observations at the interface. You get into the cage, which is a steel box about as wide as a telephone box and 2 or 3 times as long. The steel door shuts upon you and somebody working the winding gear above drops you into the void. It is, but not much sensation of movement until you get near the bottom once again. When you crawl out, you are perhaps 400 yards underground. That is to say, you have a tolerable sized mountain on top of you, hundreds of yards of solid rock, bones of extinct beasts, subsoil, flints, roots of growth, all this suspended over your head and held back only by wooden props as thick as the calf of your leg. George Orwell was attempting to counteract the disorientation of the sudden plunge into the unfamiliar ground. Mylis de Kerangal spent time at Kiruna, the world's largest iron ore mine in the far north of Sweden, and described how this thickness between the ever more hollowed out underground and the surface is not really solid at all. Over a century of existence, the intensive exploitation of the mineral deposit has modified the ground beneath the town. 1 billion tons of ore have been removed from the earth, creating an underground network of passages, tunnels, pathways, and all this has contributed, as one would expect, to a general destabilization of the terrain. Subsidence, scree, fractures. The further the mine is, town is collapsing, gradually being swallowed up by the mine. Apocalyptic visions take hold of chasms, breaches, landslides, houses and silhouettes sucked down by the depths of the earth, when it is really a more insidious threat. Buildings crumpling, concrete cracking, pavements splitting like dry biscuits, gaps appearing, surfaces splintering. It is there, dense and matte, blacker than the sky, standing beyond a flat surface. Is it close or far? I've no idea. There is no human silhouette in the landscape. What strikes me immediately is its presence. Mylis de Kerangal. A slag heap is at best a hideous thing because it is so planless and functionless. It is something just dumped on the earth, like the emptying of a giant's dustbin. On the outskirts of the mining towns, there are frightful landscapes where your horizon is ringed completely round by jagged grey mountains. Often the slag heaps are on fire, and at night you can see the red rivulets of fire winding this way and that, and the slow-moving blue flames of sulfur. This is Orwell, horrified by the slag heaps that accumulate upon the surface. South African author Nadine Gordimer picks up on their diabolical fieriness. We took a path that skirted the coal dump, and there it was at our side most of the way, a dirty, scarred old mountain, collapsing into the fold of a small ravine here, supporting a twisted peach tree there, and showing bald and black through patchy grass. The whole coal dump looked dead, forsaken, and harmless enough. But my sister and I walked softly and looked at it out of the corner of our eyes, half fascinated, half afraid, because we knew it was something else, inert. Not dead by any means, but inert. For we had seen. Coming back from the nursing home in the early winter dusk, we had seen the hot blue waver of flame. The coal dump was alive. Like a beast of prey, it woke to life in the dark. That dump is still burning today. Nobody seems to know how long it is expected to go on burning. It shares with Hades its heat and vague eternity. This was taken from her 2010 memoir, in which she recalled her childhood in the 1920s and 30s, spent in a landscape of gold and coal mines near Johannesburg. This landscape provided rich material for her writing, as we see in the following and final fragment, taken from her third novel, A World of Strangers, published in 1958. There was a horizon of strange hills. Some of them were made of soft white sand, like the sand of the desert or the sea, piled up in colossal castles. Others looked like volcanoes on whose sides the rolling lava had petrified. Rust-colored, eroded formations like the giant roots of trees marked their bases. There were others, cream, white, buff-colored, and yellow, worn into rippling corrugations by the wind, built up in horizontal ridges like the tombs of ancient kings. Where coal mines had been, black mountains of dust glittered dully. It was a man-made place in quite a different sense from that of a city. If it had not been for the hills, the horizon would have been a matter of the limitations of the human eye. Men themselves had made their own spatial boundaries, themselves had created the natural features of hills, water, and woods. What they had made in the emptiness was the symbol rather than the thing itself. The cyanide dumps were not hills. The dams of chemically treated water pumped from underground were not lakes. The plantations were not woods. But they suggested them. They stood for them. And like all true fantasies, this one had been created subconsciously. The people who had made this landscape had merely been concerned to dump above ground, out of the way, the waste matter that was incidental to the recovery of gold. From literary knowledge to the sociological imagination, the sociologists Ambare and Danilo Macicelli asked the following question: how can the novel, a highly manufactured fictional material, become a real raw material? Putting this question to the test, we consider literature to be a creator of knowledge with a role to play in the process of repairing the scars borne by mining territories. How can the action of redescribing participate in the process of the project? Are there clues to be found within literature that could help us understand and reimagine these mutating territories? And just to finish, I forgot to say at the beginning, but this is a collaborative work with a colleague, Laurie Gangarosa, who unfortunately couldn't be with us today, but wanted to mention her name as well. So, thank you. Thank you.
And
Okay. Okay, so we have Alessandra A.Ponte, who is part of the scientific committee of the chair and professor at University of Montreal, and O.Halpern, who is teaching in the University of Montreal too. And they tell us about Abitibi post-mining territories. Ouais. Je crois qu'ils vont introduire. Okay. Are you with us?
Yes.
Okay.
We-
Hello,
Hi.
Alessandra.
Hello. Small correction. Actually, Orit teaches at Concordia University in Montreal, but at Concordia.
Oh, sorry.
No problem. And we prepare a video that you can project. So we can start immediately with the video.
Studio and research project on themes of reclamation and speculative design at planetary scale. Of course, re-envisioning worlds is not easy. We have 5 steps we imagine might progress towards such a goal. First, we map the territory. Each group of architecture students created mappings at different scales of history and geography of each infrastructure. Second, we move to speculative design. We must seek to reimagine and rethink how we represent and therefore intervene in infrastructures. Third, we must reimagine ecology. How do we delineate and understand the boundaries of a system or infrastructure and its effects? Fourth, reclamation. How do we seek to reimagine the ecology and for whom? Reclamation is not repair. It is not a returning again for new forms of life. And finally, how do we inhabit these landscapes? What forms of ecos, as in home and economy, and demos, sphere of political action and agency, can we imagine for ourselves and perhaps for other beings as well? In our final moments, we return to representation, but now is a question of habitat, agency, and ultimately politics, the realm where new publics and new lives can be made visible to power and to action.
Well, thank you. That was our presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much. Do you want to tell us, you have maybe 1 or 2 minutes to comment?
Should I go?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, this work was basically, I also sent around a series of links. So I think that'll contextualize the project more, but it came out of a project about a research studio that Alessandra really kind of managed, organized, and put together. And it's part of a project me and Alessandra and the whole team and all the students are doing together that is both kind of interested in investigating the territory of Industry 4.0 and the impact of digital computing and new technologies on forestry, agriculture, and mining, but also thinking, imagining, and creatively about the future of these sites. Like, how will we live on this kind of with these toxic sites, and how do we imagine the future of a post-extractionary landscape, to speak to your theme. And one of the things that we were trying to do is think about the kind of steps, like how would you go about, and especially for architecture design students, producing a new vocabulary, a new type of imaginary, new types of stories about these spaces. So what you saw was a series of glimpses of these really amazing projects people did from the course, many of whom are in this audience right now, who we went through a series of steps where you think about how do we change the way we represent, what are the politics and ethics of representation in terms of how do we sense the environment, whether it's sound or and there was a kind of an audio project. There were a series of projects that thought about the representation. And then there's a series of projects of steps where we thought about how do we rethink our relationship to the environment and the other beings that are in that environment, whether they're bees or other types of animals. And then finally, we culminated with thinking about how do we imagine future publics and environments? So thinking about what it means to take, to rethink the demos, the scene of action and engagement in a way that incorporates, for example, the other beings that exist in that environment, and how do we also want to envision what we want to produce, or what kind of society or social space we want to produce in the place of these extractionary landscapes. So what you're seeing were sort of excerpts of plotted for extractionary landscapes.
To add more to the context, so we are working in a region of Quebec. So Canada in general is a country, the economy of the country is extraction of natural resources. So and mining is one. And in fact, mining is one, but it can be hydroelectric, it can be forestry, it can be other. So it's really, extraction of natural resources. So we extended the idea. Quebec, which is the province where we are, is also part of this economy of extraction, and the region we focus on with this strange name no one can pronounce. It's Abitibi-Témiscamingue. This is how you pronounce. Is considered and defined by the province of Quebec as a resource region. So again, really insisting, this is like a huge, so it's the territory of extraction. And we use this idea of the free ecologies, thinking about Guattari, the free ecologies, but also about Barnum, the architectural critics and historian that was using the four ecologies to describe Los Angeles. And the three ecologies for us were forestry, agriculture, and mining, that are parts of the history of extraction in this region. So that was the idea behind the whole project. I think now the context should be more clear.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Will you be able to stay with us until for the debate?
Yes.
Okay.
I will stay.
Okay.
Yes.
So now we have E.Cogato Lanza, who is also part of the scientific committee of the Chaire post-mining. So Elena from the Lausanne EPFL.
Yes. Hello to everyone. Thank you very much, Beatrice, to inviting me to be there today. The day is really so rich and so intense. I'm really happy to also to discover a bit the field of studies on mining situations, which is not exactly my own field of studies. I'm an architect by education, and my activity are mainly focused on theory and the history of urbanism. And in particular, what I'm trying to do today is to make a contribution starting from my interest in agricultural territories. In fact, as Alessandra A.Ponte told us just some minutes ago, there is an analogy between mining territories and agricultural ones in terms of really of their nature of productive activities of extraction, territories marked by that. So extraction of different raw materials, mineral or vegetables. And so now I'm going to share my screen just to have a presentation for you. So, and materials, raw material and materials in general really is the...
Non, Elena, on voit pas là.
I'm sharing with this. You can't see. Just I try to, yeah. I'm going to share again.
Ah oui, d'accord.
Can you see?
Okay,
Perfect.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine.
Thank you. Perfect. So let's focus on what is called the material turn that has affected different fields of studies: architecture, history of culture, and urban history. In particular, in the field of urban history, the material turn is brought to real association of historical research with metabolic analysis in a very pioneering way. Let's just mention the seminal work of Sabine Barle and the special vocabulary that she uses, merging both the words of an historian and those of material cycles sciences. Such hybrid vocabulary mirrors the very fruitful way of dealing with time, both in terms of historical evolution and historical vicissitude. So today I'd like to argue the relevance of a material approach of the territory oriented to nurture projects on it. A material turn, which in my case I have experienced as an enlargement of a more morphological approach based on spatial principles and patterns. And yeah, I will argue the relevance of material approach by underlining 3 points, respectively upon the principle of multifunctionality, the role of values, and the large potential of appropriation opened up by this approach. And I think that these 3 terms, multifunctionality, value, appropriation, are really echoing some of the presentations that we have attended today in the morning. And I will deal with these 3 principles, referring to the theme of agriculture. So for nearly 20 years, I've been studying the Swiss Federal Plan for Food Self-Sufficiency, elaborated during the World War. It is known as the Plan Valais from the name of his main office involved in the framework of the FAO. Whereas 20 years ago, I strategy of rationalization of agriculture, which was coupled with a revolutionary territorial vision, recently it occurred to me to revisit this plan in relation to present debate on food security. From this point of view, I was led to examine in a more deeper and precise way the plan as a technical tool to manage raw matters as land, vegetation, animals, fuel, all material elements involved in agricultural production. In the context of the suspension of international trade as a consequence of the closing of frontiers during the war, the objective of the plan was to allow Switzerland to produce an amount of food and nutrients equivalent to that normally imported. And to do so, Valen established a mathematical equation between food needs and arable land. According to that, the plan stated that crops should be extended to all arable areas and that the level of production should be improved through rationalization. So rationalization in terms of mechanization, in terms of silos and silage storage, in terms of drying plants, and so on. And it was launched to do that. It was launched the new federal land registry for agricultural production, accomplishing an agricultural land survey throughout Switzerland in a really record time. Each communal land registry was composed by a map which distinguishes between non-crops areas and arable land, and by a very detailed set of tables recording all relevant resources, whether surface, business, labor, machinery, livestock, infrastructure, like, for instance, railway stations, and so on. And what is fascinating to me is that by detailing exactly all physical elements involved in agriculture, Valen created the possibility for many different plans without producing only one plan in a deterministic way. Actually, as you can see just from this small picture, different organizations of the elements could be compared in light of their final caloric yield. Indeed, let's remember that 1940, that period marks the affirmation of the calories as a unit of measurement. Calories is the new criteria in order to conceive a food regime in the framework of the nutritional sciences, which are at that moment in a very, very full swing. Calories made it possible, so, to establish equations between heterogeneous elements such as food, human labor, machine performance, fuel, animal labor, animal food needs. Every raw matter has at least two functions, which can be exactly measured through calories. Soils can be used either for gardening or for grazing. Animals can be eaten or can be used as fuel, as pulling power. Moreover, each function can be performed by two elements. Production can be the result of human labor or machine work, and calories calculation is meant so not to freeze one way of cultivating and consequently only one way of land use. But calories calculation is meant to be really yes, a tool to open up to innovation, to new transitions among food regime, cultivation methods, need use. So after this quite very quick presentation, now I'm going back to the 3 points that I have announced before. So that was multifunctionality, value, and appropriation. The first point to me of my arguments in favor of a material approach in territorial studies is that the very material approach here in the example of agriculture leads to multifunctionality. It really helps us to overcome the limits of sectorial planning. The second point of my argument deepen to, again, the implication of this fundamental position where material is energy. When each material performance and material transformation can be translated into energy calculation, the final decision on the final decision reveal in a very clear way the relevant values that matter finally beyond the quantitative calculation. What I mean, for instance, I mean that a final decision on food regime reveals which values are dominant between health or cultural tradition, for instance. A final decision on agricultural techniques reveals a hierarchy between social mobility and landscape value, between the priority of making urban factory workers become farmers and vice versa, and on the other side, the priority of traditional landscape conservation. What I mean is that the criteria of calories, so this really quantitative criteria, make clear the role of value in final decision concerning way of living, way of working, and way of inhabiting. Consequently, the respective frontier between material rational and cultural rational spring up in a very clear way. Finally, the third point that I wanted to deal with, remember, it was appropriation. This appropriation speaks about the very large potential of appropriation by various actors and stakeholders in a context of material apprehension of a territory and of also the way of planning it. As a matter of fact, the national effort for self-sufficiency in Switzerland took place combining very top-down strategies with bottom-up initiatives. On one side, and mechanization of the primary economic sector was led in very authoritarian way, by erasing regional traditions. And on the other side, there were associations and interest groups closer to what we call today civil society. And of Plan Valen, which is maybe the more disseminated iconography of this national politics. Evolving at this vernacular level, local cooperative commissions developed local actions such as finding land, cultivate, gardening classes, and creating individual crops. They were determinant in creating a public space for the plan already set by traveling exhibition and the broadcasting of sorry. So you see this the document that you have already seen before. Just look at it again or once. If you examine the document used by Valen to spread information and initiate all population to the plan in order to create a national coherent effort towards the objective of food self-sufficiency, quantified, openly presented as element of a systemic combinatory. And I think that the material rationale, as represented, as we see here in this document, this material rationale was determinant in creating this public space and general appropriation by all sides of society. It consisted in an accessible knowledge, accessible from the point of view of its content and of its practical improvement. So knowledge could become agency. So in conclusion, yeah, from my side, really my intention today was here to raise reason to suggest you to deepen material approach that we have already seen mobilized in a lot of the contribution that we have attended today. The idea is that dealing post-mining territories through a material perspective really can help to open up not only deep productive futures, but also different possible territories, starting from a very fundamental way and a quite basic way of describing present conditions and resources. So I was certainly a bit schematical in my presentation and my statement, but really my intention was just to focus some issues, and I hope really to nurture future activity of the chaire du bassin minier. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much.